Oh, this is good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. So let's segue into another church and culture issue, or I won't say issue, but topic that's people discuss quite a bit, and that is dealing with poverty. And I want to start with this. Many people believe when it comes to certain pastors, that a pastor has a lot of influence. They believe, well, a pastor shouldn't be making a certain amount of money. All the money from tithes, offering, that kind of stuff should go to helping the poor and all that kind of stuff, which is great. So let me get some of your thoughts on, should pastors who are affluent, mega pastors, or, pastors who are well off, should they be, riding around in convertibles and Rolls Royces if they have it, and making that type of money off the church that they pastor?
I think there's a bias here. I think just focusing on pastors with big churches is not really addressing the issue, because there are pastors of small churches who kind of have a way of siphoning off, a little change here, a little change there from the building fund, and things not getting done around the church like they should. And we just need to be talking about integrity right now instead of how much they should have. And I think from the standpoint of being a member of a congregation, that needs to be something that's handled and considered in a consensus type of manner as the Holy Spirit leads. I've been a member of other churches, other denominations, and they kind of do things differently. Some have a committee meeting. Others just are led by the Holy Spirit. They consider their needs before they pay their pastors, and other pastors are paid first before everything else is taken care of. However you think the Holy Spirit is going to lead in that is really what a church should be considering, not necessarily how big their car is. And I don't know that when you're in a congregation that you can really give your 2 cents on who should and who deserves what anyway. And so
as long as the needs of the house are taken care of, I personally, I don't have a problem with pastors having nice things. There's a lot of pastors who they have the mindset of, I've heard pastors talk about how they grew up in churches where the pastor was constantly struggling. The pastor and his wife was sharing a car, or they were facing foreclosure, just different things of that nature. So in their mind, they said, I'm going to create income and a stream of income to where I don't have to depend on the church to supply my needs, my lifestyle.
that's okay.
And it is okay. If they want to go out and write books, that's great. If they want to go out, produce music, do things that are bringing in streams of income so they don't have to depend upon the church, I think that that's great. But just like you said, it goes back to integrity and accountability. If there's somebody in there in the accounting area that is looking after the funds and making sure that those things aren't being mishandled or misplaced, and I think that that's great. But I don't have a problem with the pastor driving a Benz. That's, to me, favor of the Lord.
I think, too, we as the church have to be careful that we don't judge too quickly. I'm remembering, I won't mention who the individual was, the pastor, but I'm guessing that the pastor was such a blessing to the church that the church decided that they wanted to bless the pastor with something very nice. It was a very nice car. And this was a worldwide pastor that was known. And the reaction of the world and even the church to that was very negative. But I had a problem with that is because that's that congregation. If they decide that they want to bless their pastor with something like that, who am I to judge that? I really had a problem with that. So I don't think there's one hard, fast rule. We just have to be careful that we're not judging. Jesus said, judge righteously. Well, if you're judging based on just limited information, then I don't think you're judging righteously. Yeah. So we have to be careful there, I think.
I kind of, my thoughts about it is it's somewhat of a red herring to really address the underlying issue of poverty. That churches want to focus in on those kind of discussions instead of really focusing on, we have poor people in the world who need our help. How do we help this? And so we like to throw stones at pastors who make too much money, or at individual, people within a church who make too much money and aren't giving enough, when really the conversation needs to be broader and wider than that. In my church, it's a church decision. We approve a budget, and then part of that budget is the salary of the pastor. And, that salary can go up or go down based on, the needs and the beliefs in the church. And I think that's a very appropriate way. Where that level stops is not as important as the other conversations about issues of poverty that are going on.
I would agree, because you're only addressing who's getting too much. You haven't addressed the answer of who's not getting anything. And so how do we set up programs? How do we set up a ministry to at least take care of the poor people in our congregation, make sure they have clothes to wear and food to eat and shoes to wear and their kids can get to school? And if you can maintain a successful ministry in that, we can expand. And then we can talk about solutions of, the balance between paying our pastor and making sure the needs of our own congregation are met.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next question that I want to toss at David. What can churches do? I know we had some great churches doing some great stuff in the community, helping the poor, but what can the universal church do more to help the existential plights of those in the poor, poverty? And when I say poor and poverty, I'm talking about education. I'm talking about, underserved schools and things of that nature, not just, homeless people, So what are some of your thoughts that you feel that we can do as a universal church?
Well, going to where they are as much as we can to try to meet the needs where our local officials or our local communities or organizations really aren't willing to go. Like, for example, right now in New York City, right now the parents and other officials are actually upset because they had this arbitrary threshold for hospitalizations, and then once they got to a certain percentage, they were going to start shutting down schools. Leave the restaurants and the bars open, but shutting down schools. And so our kids who are in situations where they don't have as many resources because of their family background, or maybe they're like doubled up in homes and they're expected to go virtual. And when you have very limited resources, and that's not really just, there's a lot of concern right now for the kids that are already behind. And so every time they shut down schools, okay, so how much farther is that gap getting? Okay, so anything that church communities can do to try to help fill that gap with maybe just lending out resources. Right now, technology resources are huge. Networking issues are huge. To the point where when our schools were shut down, school buses were being used as hotspots. So anything that the church could do to stand in that gap, to help out where our kids from marginalized backgrounds are needing some kind of help to help with their situation, I think would be a huge blessing.